The night was as black as coal when Zachariah Jenkins rode back to his ranch, his body aching from 15 hours of mending fences and chasing strays. Through the darkness, a single point of light beckoned a lantern, perched carefully on his fence post. The flame danced inside the glass, a tiny star guiding him home. It had appeared there every night for a week now, and he had no idea who was responsible, though a suspicion flickered in his mind like that distant flame. It was 1878 in the dusty outskirts of Promise Creek, Wyoming territory. The railroad had come through 2 years prior, transforming the sleepy settlement into a growing town with aspirations of greatness. Zachariah Zach to the few he called friends had arrived 4 years earlier, purchasing a modest spread when land was still cheap and plentiful. At 32, he'd built a respectable ranch with his own calloused hands, though it remained a lonely existence. As he approached the lantern, he noticed something new, a cloth-wrapped bundle beside it. Dismounting his tired mare, Penny, he unwrapped it to find a still warm apple pie. His stomach growled in instant response. The only baker in town who could make a crust that flaky was Katherine O'Brien, the widow who'd opened the town's first proper bakery 6 months ago. Mighty peculiar, he muttered to himself, lifting the lantern and pie carefully. He led Penny to the stable, removed her tack, brushed her down, and made sure she had fresh water and oats before heading to his cabin. Inside, he lit his own lamps and set the mysterious pie on his table, staring at it as if it might reveal its secrets. Katherine O'Brien was something of an enigma in Promise Creek. She'd arrived from Boston following her husband's death, they said, used what little she had to open her bakery, which had quickly become the talk of the town. She was 30 years old, with auburn hair and eyes the color of summer grass. Zach had exchanged perhaps 20 words with her in total, mostly related to the purchase of bread. He couldn't fathom why she'd leave a lantern and pie for him. Tomorrow, he decided, he would ride into town and ask her directly. But tonight, he would enjoy the unexpected gift. He cut himself a generous slice, savoring the perfect balance of tart apples and sweet cinnamon. It was the finest thing to cross his lips in months. The next morning, Zach woke before dawn as usual. He fed the animals, checked on a pregnant heifer, and rode into town just as businesses were opening their doors. O'Brien's bakery already had a small line forming outside. The aroma of fresh bread and pastries wafted into the street, making his mouth water despite his substantial breakfast. When his turn came, he found himself face to face with Katherine O'Brien herself. She wore a flour-dusted apron over a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back in a practical bun with a few rebellious strands framing her face. "Mr. Jenkins," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "what can I get for you today?" He removed his hat, turning it awkwardly in his hands. "Madam, I believe I have you to thank for a lantern and the finest apple pie I've ever tasted." A blush crept up her neck. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Jenkins." A customer behind him cleared his throat impatiently. "2 loaves of sourdough," Zach said, placing coins on the counter. "And perhaps a moment of your time when you're not so busy?" She nodded almost imperceptibly as she wrapped his bread. "I close at 4. At 4:15, Zach returned to find Katherine sweeping the bakery floor. When the bell above the door jingled, she looked up, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Jenkins," she acknowledged, setting the broom aside. "Mrs. O'Brien, I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to thank you properly for your kindness." She busied herself with arranging already neat display cases. "I noticed you riding back after dark most evenings. The trail to your ranch can be treacherous without light." "It is indeed." He paused. "Though I'm curious why you'd concern yourself with my well-being." Katherine finally met his gaze. "Everyone needs someone looking out for them, Mr. Jenkins, even solitary cowboys." "Zach," he corrected. "If you're leaving lanterns and pies on my property, you might as well use my given name." A small smile tugged at her lips. Katherine, then. Why me, Katherine? She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. You helped me once, though you may not remember. When I first arrived in town, my wagon wheel broke on Main Street, blocking traffic. While others complained, you fixed it without a word, then disappeared before I could thank you. Zach vaguely recalled the incident. That hardly merits nightly lanterns and fresh-baked goods. Perhaps not, she conceded. But it showed me your character. And I've noticed how hard you work. Always alone. I thought... She trailed off, suddenly looking embarrassed. You thought? I thought perhaps you could use a reminder that someone sees you. Her words struck him unexpectedly deep. How long had it been since anyone had truly seen him? Since he'd been anything but the quiet rancher on the edge of town? I appreciate it more than I can say, he admitted, his voice rougher than intended. But I can't accept such generosity without offering something in return. Katherine considered this. Your fence along the North Road needs mending. I notice it on my morning walks. Fix that, and we'll call it even. Zach couldn't help but smile. Is that so? I wasn't aware my property maintenance was the talk of morning strolls. Only mine, she replied with newfound boldness. I'll see to it tomorrow, he promised. And perhaps I could call on you properly this Sunday, after church? The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been for such a simple invitation. I'd like that, she answered softly. True to his word, Zach spent the following day repairing the stretch of fence along the North Road. As he worked, he found himself glancing toward town more frequently than necessary, wondering if Katherine might pass by on one of her walks. She didn't, but the thought of her noticing his work made him take extra care with each post and rail. That night, the lantern appeared again on his fence post, this time with a small basket containing fresh bread and a jar of honey. He brought it inside with a smile he couldn't suppress. For the first time in years, his cabin felt a little less empty. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Zach shaved carefully, donned his best shirt, and rode into town for the church service, something he typically attended only on Christmas and Easter. He sat in the back, scanning the pews until he spotted Katherine's auburn hair several rows ahead. Throughout Reverend Taylor's sermon on community and fellowship, Zach found his attention wandering to her profile. After the service, townspeople gathered outside to socialize. Zach waited patiently at the edge of the crowd until Katherine noticed him and made her way over. Good morning, Zach, she said, a touch of shyness in her voice. I didn't expect to see you in church today. I had good reason to attend, he replied honestly. They walked together through town, their conversation starting hesitantly but growing more comfortable with each step. He learned she'd been in Promise Creek for 7 months, that her husband Patrick had died of influenza 2 years prior, and that baking had been her sanctuary during grief. My mother taught me from the time I could stand on a chair at the counter, she explained as they passed the schoolhouse. When everything else in life seemed uncertain, flour and butter and sugar always behaved as expected if you treated them right. Unlike cattle, Zach commented, which made her laugh. Is that why you became a rancher? For the unpredictability? He considered this. No, I suppose it was for the opposite reason. There's a rhythm to it, the seasons, the calving, the drives. Different from baking, but still a kind of certainty. They stopped for lunch at the hotel restaurant, ignoring the curious glances from other patrons. Promise Creek wasn't so big that a bachelor rancher and a widow taking a meal together wouldn't cause a stir of interest. Will you tell me about your ranch? Katherine asked as they waited for their food. So Zach told her about his 160 acres, the small herd he was carefully growing, the creek that ran through the northern corner providing year-round water. He described the cabin he'd built with his own hands, and his plans to expand it someday. It sounds peaceful, she said when he finished. It can be lonely, he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. But yes, peaceful too. After lunch, he walked her back to the small rooms she rented behind the bakery. "Thank you for today," she said, standing at her door. "May I call on you again?" Her smile was answer enough, but she added, "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." That evening, Zach rode home later than usual. The lantern was there on his fence post, as was becoming familiar. This time, no food accompanied it, but something about the steadiness of that flame in the darkness felt even more meaningful. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Zach would work his ranch during the day, often staying late to complete whatever tasks needed doing. Each night, he'd return to find Catherine's lantern guiding him home. Some evenings brought small gifts, bread, pies, once a knitted scarf when the autumn air turned crisp. Every Sunday, he would attend church and spend the afternoon with Catherine, gradually learning her story as she learned his. He discovered that beneath her composed exterior lay a woman of remarkable strength and surprising humor. She'd left everything familiar in Boston to start anew after losing Patrick. The bakery had been a dream she'd never thought possible in her previous life. Patrick was kind, she told Zach one Sunday as they walked along the creek that ran behind his property. But his family had expectations. A banker's wife doesn't flour her hands daily for profit. "And now?" Zach asked, helping her over a fallen log. "Now I answer to no one but myself and my customers," she replied, her eyes sparkling. "Though I find I care more about one customer's opinion than the others." October brought cattle buyers through Promise Creek, and Zach was busy from dawn until well after dusk negotiating sales and arranging transportation for his stock. For nearly a week, he arrived home so late that he could barely make out the glow of Catherine's lantern from the road. On the sixth night, exhausted from moving cattle to the railroad pens, he was surprised to find not just the lantern, but Catherine herself waiting by his fence. "You shouldn't be out here alone," were the first words from his mouth, though his heart leaped at the sight of her. "I was worried," she said simply. "You haven't been to town in days." "The cattle sale," he explained, dismounting to stand before her. In the lantern light, her eyes looked impossibly green. "I should have sent word." "Yes, you should have." But there was no real reproach in her voice. She held out a covered basket. "You need to eat something besides beans and jerky." Their hands touched as she passed him the basket, and neither pulled away immediately. Something shifted between them in that moment, a boundary crossed, though so subtly it was hard to mark. "Come inside," he said softly. "Please. I can make coffee." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. His cabin suddenly felt different with Catherine in it, smaller yet somehow more spacious, humble yet more like a true home. He busied himself with the coffee pot while she set out the food she'd brought: fried chicken, biscuits, apple butter, and pickled vegetables. "This is a feast," he said, genuinely touched by her thoughtfulness. They ate at his small table, their conversation easy despite this being the first time they'd been alone together indoors. When they finished, Zach built up the fire against the evening chill. "I should get back to town," Catherine said, though she made no move to leave her chair. "It's too dark now," Zach replied. "The road isn't safe." "Are you suggesting I stay here?" Her eyebrows lifted, though there was a teasing quality to her surprise. "I'm suggesting I ride you home safely," he clarified with a smile. "Though, if you were to stay, you would have the bed, and I would take the floor by the fire." She studied him for a long moment, then rose to her feet. "I believe it would cause less talk if you saw me home, Mr. Jenkins." The formality was belied by the warmth in her eyes. He helped her with her shawl, his fingers lingering on her shoulders. "Catherine," he said quietly, turning her to face him, "I need to speak plainly. These past weeks have meant more to me than I can properly express. Your lantern has become more than light, it's become hope." Her breath caught audibly. Zach, please, let me finish. I've been alone most of my life, and I convinced myself that was how I preferred it. But now I find myself hurrying through my days just to see your lantern in the distance, knowing you thought of me. Catherine's eyes glistened in the firelight. When Patrick died, I thought that part of my life was over. I came here to build something new, something that was mine alone. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. I never expected you. Zach covered her hand with his. May I court you properly, Katherine O'Brien, with the intention of making you my wife, if you'll have me? Her smile bloomed slowly, like a sunrise. Yes, she whispered. Though I think we've been courting these past months whether we named it so or not. He couldn't help but laugh softly. I suppose we have. That night, after seeing Katherine safely home, Zach rode back to his ranch, with his heart fuller than his cabin had ever been. The lantern still glowed on his fence post, and now it seemed to burn with promise rather than simple illumination. Word spread quickly through Promise Creek about Zachariah Jenkins officially courting the widow O'Brien. Some expressed surprise, others claimed they'd seen it coming for months. Katherine endured the knowing looks and questions from her customers with gracious dignity, while Zach mostly avoided town, except when calling on Katherine. As November brought the first dusting of snow to the high country, Zach worked frantically to prepare his ranch for winter. He repaired the barn roof, stocked hay, and reinforced the corrals. Katherine still lit a lantern for him each night, though now she often left it earlier in the evening before returning to town. One crisp afternoon, Zach rode into town with a specific purpose in mind. He tied Penny outside the general store and strode inside, nodding greetings to the other customers as he made his way to the glass case where Walter Phillips kept his more valuable items. Afternoon, Jenkins, Phillips said, coming around the counter. What can I help you with today? I'm looking for a ring, Zach said, lowering his voice. An engagement ring. Phillips's eyebrows shot up, but to his credit, he simply nodded and unlocked the case. Got these in from Denver last month, he said, setting a small tray on the counter. Most were too ostentatious for Katherine's practical nature, but one caught Zach's eye, a simple gold band with a small emerald flanked by two tiny diamonds. That one, he said, pointing. Reminds me of her eyes. The ring cost nearly as much as a good breeding bull, but Zach paid without hesitation. He tucked the small box inside his coat pocket and headed directly to the bakery. It was almost closing time, and Katherine was serving her last customer when he entered. Her face brightened at the sight of him. "This is a pleasant surprise," she said once they were alone. "I wasn't expecting you until Sunday." "I finished mending the north pasture fence early," he explained, suddenly nervous. The speech he'd rehearsed on the ride into town evaporated from his mind. Katherine tilted her head, studying him. "Is everything all right? You look strange." "I'm perfect," he assured her, then cleared his throat. "That is, everything's fine. Better than fine." He took her flour-dusted hands in his. "Katherine, I had a whole speech planned." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Zach." He dropped to one knee right there on the bakery floor, pulling the ring box from his pocket. "Katherine O'Brien, you lit a lantern to guide me home before I even knew I was lost. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she managed through a watery smile. "Yes, Zachariah Jenkins." The ring fit perfectly on her finger. When he stood and pulled her into his arms, the kiss they shared tasted of sugar and salt and newfound joy. They agreed to marry after Christmas, giving them time to make proper arrangements. Reverend Taylor announced their engagement the following Sunday, to applause from the congregation. Katherine began training young Alice Cooper to help in the bakery, with the intention of leaving the business in Alice's capable hands when she moved to the ranch. Zach, meanwhile, threw himself into preparing his cabin for a wife. He built a proper bedroom addition, installed larger windows to let in more light, and constructed sturdy furniture to replace his bachelor furnishings. Each improvement was made with Katherine in mind: shelves for her books, a larger kitchen with an oven that would allow her to continue baking at home. December brought heavy snow and bitter cold. The trail between town and Zach's ranch became increasingly difficult to navigate, limiting their time together. Still, every night without fail, a lantern appeared on his fence post, sometimes placed by Katherine herself, other times by neighbors she'd enlisted to help maintain their ritual. A week before Christmas, Promise Creek found itself in the grip of the worst blizzard in memory. Wind howled across the plains, driving snow into drifts taller than a man. Zach spent 3 days unable to leave his property, keeping the livestock fed and watered while worrying about Katherine in town. When the storm finally broke, he immediately saddled Penny and set out for Promise Creek, following the road by memory where it disappeared beneath the snow. The normally 30-minute ride took over 2 hours of careful navigation. The town had weathered the storm well, with only minor damage to a few buildings. Zach headed straight for the bakery, finding it closed. He continued to Katherine's rooms behind the shop, knocking urgently. The door swung open to reveal not Katherine but Alice Cooper, looking harried. "Thank goodness you're here, Mr. Jenkins," she blurted. "Miss Katherine's taken ill." Ice that had nothing to do with the weather formed in Zach's veins. "What do you mean, ill?" "Fever started 2 days ago," Alice explained, ushering him inside. "Dr. Price has been by twice, says it's influenza." Zach removed his hat, snow falling from the brim onto the floor. "Where is she?" Alice led him to the small bedroom where Katherine lay beneath several quilts, her face flushed with fever. Her eyes were closed, her breathing labored. Zach knelt beside the bed, taking her hot, dry hand in his. "Katherine," he said softly, "I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. "Zach," she whispered. "The lantern." "Don't worry about the lantern," he soothed. "Just rest." "No," she insisted with surprising force. "Promise me, the lantern stays lit." Understanding dawned painfully. Her husband had died of influenza. Now she feared the same fate, the same separation. "It will stay lit," he promised, "but you're going to be fine. You're strong, Katherine, stronger than this illness." She seemed to relax at his words, her eyes drifting closed again. Zach turned to Alice. "What did the doctor say exactly?" "That she needs rest and fluids, that the fever might get worse before it breaks." The girl twisted her hands anxiously. "He said to prepare for a difficult few days." Zach nodded grimly. "I'll stay with her. Can you manage the bakery?" "I already closed it," Alice admitted. "Folks understand, with the weather and Miss Katherine being sick." "Good girl," he approved. "Now go home to your family. I'll send word if there's any change." Once Alice departed, Zach set about making Katherine as comfortable as possible. He brewed the medicinal tea Dr. Price had left, coaxed her to drink small sips of water, and placed cool cloths on her forehead when the fever burned hottest. Through it all, he talked to her about the ranch, about their future, about the life they would build together. Night fell, and Zach suddenly remembered her concern about the lantern. He found one in her kitchen, filled it with oil, and placed it in her front window where it would be visible from the street. It wasn't the same as the one on his fence post, but the symbolism remained a light in the darkness, a promise of return. For 3 days and nights, Zach barely left Katherine's side. The fever rose and fell like the tide, sometimes leaving her delirious, other times allowing moments of lucidity where she would squeeze his hand or manage a few words. Dr. Price visited daily, his expression grave but not hopeless. "She's fighting hard," he told Zach on the 3rd evening, "and having you here gives her something to fight for." On the 4th night, Zach dozed in the chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers. He awoke with a start when she stirred. "Zach?" Her voice was weak, but clearer than it had been since he arrived. He leaned forward immediately. "I'm here, love." Catherine's eyes were open and, for the first time in days, focused. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed." He brought her hand to his lips. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by cattle," she admitted with the faintest smile. "But better, I think." He touched her forehead, cool and damp rather than burning. Relief washed through him so powerfully he had to close his eyes for a moment. "You had me worried," he said, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion. "Patrick," she began, then swallowed hard. "When Patrick fell ill, it happened so quickly. Within a week he was gone. I was so afraid." "I know," Zach soothed. "But you're stronger than this illness. I told you that." "You did," she agreed. "And the lantern?" "Lit every night," he assured her. "Though I think folks in town must believe I've gone mad, lighting lamps in empty houses." That earned him a genuine laugh, small but precious. "Not mad," she murmured. "Just mine." The next morning, Dr. Price confirmed what Zach already knew: the fever had broken. Katherine would need time to regain her strength, but the worst had passed. "You should get some proper rest yourself," the doctor advised Zach. "You look worse than my patient." Katherine, propped up on pillows and sipping broth, nodded agreement. "Go home, Zach. Check on your ranch. I'm not going anywhere." Reluctantly, he conceded that they were right. He needed to see to his livestock and get some sleep in a real bed. After extracting promises from both Katherine and Alice, who had returned to help, that they would send for him immediately if anything changed, he kissed Katherine's still pale cheek and headed for his horse. The ride home was easier with the snow packed down by previous travelers. As he approached his ranch, the familiar sight of his cabin and outbuildings filled him with both relief and a strange new sensation, the awareness that soon this wouldn't be just his place anymore, but theirs. He tended to the animals, replenished feed and water, and finally allowed himself to collapse into his own bed. He slept for 12 straight hours, waking disoriented to bright morning light. After a quick meal and another round of chores, he was preparing to ride back to town when he noticed something unexpected: a wagon approaching his property. As it drew closer, he recognized Emmett Taylor, the Reverend's son, driving with someone bundled in blankets beside him. His heart leaped as he realized the passenger was Katherine. He hurried to meet the wagon as it pulled up to his cabin. "What in God's name are you doing out of bed?" he demanded, though he couldn't keep the joy from his voice at seeing her. "Merry Christmas to you, too," Katherine replied with a tired but mischievous smile. Zach glanced at Emmett, who shrugged. "Don't look at me. She can be mighty persuasive when she sets her mind to something." Zach lifted Katherine carefully from the wagon, blankets and all. "You shouldn't be traveling. You're still recovering." "It's Christmas Eve," she said, as if that explained everything. "And I couldn't bear the thought of you spending it alone at the ranch after taking such good care of me." He carried her inside, settling her in the new rocking chair near the fire. Only then did he notice that Emmett was unloading packages and baskets from the wagon. "What's all this?" he asked. "Christmas," Katherine explained. "I may not be at full strength, but I can still direct operations. Alice and the ladies from church helped prepare everything." Emmett brought in the last of the items, tipped his hat, and departed with a knowing grin. Zach surveyed the collection of food, greenery, and parcels now crowding his cabin. "You're determined to celebrate, aren't you?" he said, shaking his head in wonder. "This will be our first Christmas together," Katherine said softly. "The first of many, I hope. I wanted it to be special, even if I can't do much more than sit here." Zach knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Having you here, alive and recovering, is the only gift I need. They spent the day quietly. Zach hung the evergreen boughs Katherine had brought, filling the cabin with their fresh scent. She directed him in, warming the food ham, sweet potatoes, cornbread, and pie. As darkness fell, he lit every lamp in the house, plus the lantern he placed on the fence post as always. After they ate, sitting close together before the fire, Katherine handed him a carefully wrapped package. "Merry Christmas, Zach." Inside was a hand-knitted sweater in deep blue wool, obviously made with great care. "I've been working on it since October," she explained. "I finished the last stitches the night before I fell ill." "It's perfect," he said, immediately pulling it on over his shirt. The wool was soft, the fit exact. "I have something for you too, though it wasn't supposed to be a Christmas gift." He retrieved a small wooden box from his bedroom and placed it in her hands. Katherine opened it to find a gold locket, oval-shaped and intricately engraved. "It's beautiful," she breathed, opening the locket to find it empty. "I thought," Zach said hesitantly, "that someday it might hold pictures of our children." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "I'd like that very much." He helped her fasten it around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin. "I have one more gift, though it's not quite finished." Taking her hand, he led her slowly to the bedroom addition he'd been building. "This will be our room," he explained, showing her the larger windows, the space where their bed would stand. "And through here." He guided her to another doorway. Beyond was a smaller room, the walls freshly constructed, the floor not yet complete. A single piece of furniture occupied the space, a handcrafted wooden cradle. Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. "I know I'm presuming," Zach said quickly, "but I wanted you to see that I'm planning for our future. All of it." She turned to him, her eyes shining. "It's not presumption to hope for children, Zach. It's faith." He drew her gently into his arms, mindful of her still recovering strength. "You taught me about faith, Katherine. Every night when I'd ride home tired and alone, that lantern reminded me that someone cared whether I made it back safely." "I'll always care," she promised. "I'll always light your way home." They married on New Year's Day, with most of Promise Creek in attendance despite the winter weather. Katherine wore a simple ivory dress with her mother's lace veil. Zach, in his Sunday best with his new blue sweater beneath his coat, watched her walk down the aisle with wonder in his eyes. Reverend Taylor spoke of new beginnings, of faith in darkness, of the light of love guiding two paths into one. When Zach and Katherine exchanged their vows, their voices were clear and certain, carrying to the back pews of the small church. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Taylor declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration afterward was held at the hotel, with food contributed by nearly every household in town. Katherine, still regaining her strength, sat for most of the festivities, receiving well wishes with Zach steadfast beside her. As evening approached, he leaned close to her. "Are you tired? We can leave whenever you wish." She smiled up at him. "I'm ready to go home if you are." Home. The word held new meaning now. They thanked their guests, accepted final congratulations, and made their way to the waiting sleigh that would carry them to the ranch to their home. The journey passed in comfortable silence, Katherine nestled against Zach's side beneath thick blankets. As they approached the ranch, they saw it before they rounded the final bend, a lantern, glowing on the fence post. "Did you arrange that?" Katherine asked in surprise. Zach shook his head, equally puzzled. Then he noticed smoke rising from the chimney of the cabin, which should have been cold and dark. As they drew closer, the front door opened, spilling golden light onto the snow. Alice Cooper stood there waving. "Surprise," she called as Zach helped Katherine from the sleigh. "We wanted to make sure your first night home was warm and welcoming." Inside, they found the fire built up, lamps lit, and a simple supper waiting on the table. Alice had been joined by Emmett Taylor and his sister Ruth, who beamed at the newlyweds. "We won't stay," Ruth assured them, already reaching for her coat. "We just wanted to make sure you didn't come home to a cold house." "And to deliver these," Emmett added, gesturing to a pile of wedding gifts arranged carefully in the corner. After thanking their friends profusely and seeing them off, Zach and Katherine found themselves alone at last, husband and wife, in their own home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jenkins," Zach said softly, taking her hands in his. Katherine's smile was radiant despite her lingering fatigue. "It feels right, being here with you." He scooped her up in his arms, making her laugh in surprise. "Then allow me to properly carry my bride over the threshold of our bedroom." Later, as they lay together in the new bed Zach had built for them, Katherine rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I never thought I'd find this again," she admitted quietly. "After Patrick died, I thought that part of my life was finished." Zach stroked her hair, which fell loose around her shoulders. "And I never thought I'd find it at all. I'd convinced myself I was meant for solitude." "We were both wrong," she murmured sleepily. "Thankfully," he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Spring came early that year, bringing warm winds and new growth to the high plains. Katherine's strength returned fully with the lengthening days. She divided her time between helping Alice run the bakery in town and making their cabin truly a home. Zach found himself working with renewed purpose, expanding the garden, adding a milk cow to their stock, building a hen house for the chickens they acquired. One evening in late April, he returned from checking fence lines to find Katherine waiting for him on the porch, her face alight with a special kind of joy. "What is it?" he asked, dismounting quickly. She took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach. "We're going to need that cradle sooner than we thought." Zach stared at her in wonder, then let out a whoop that startled the horses in the corral. He lifted her and spun her around, both of them laughing in delight. "When?" he asked when he finally set her down. "Dr. Price says November," she replied, "just before Thanksgiving." That night, as they had every night since their wedding, they lit the lantern together and placed it on the fence post, a tradition neither wanted to abandon. But now the light seemed to shine with new promise, a beacon not just for the present, but for the future they were building together. Summer brought long days of hard work and quiet evenings on the porch. Katherine's belly grew round beneath her aprons, and Zach found himself constantly distracted by the miracle of impending fatherhood. He completed the nursery, added a porch swing where Katherine could rest in the shade, and built a proper stone path from the house to the garden she had planted. In August, Alice Cooper married Emmett Taylor, with Katherine and Zach standing up for them despite Katherine's advancing pregnancy. Alice would continue running the bakery, sending a portion of the profits to Katherine as the owner. The arrangement satisfied everyone, especially the townsfolk who had grown dependent on O'Brien's bread and pastries. As autumn painted the landscape in gold and crimson, Zach grew increasingly anxious about Katherine's confinement. The nearest midwife lived in Promise Creek, a half-hour ride in good weather. "I've been thinking," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting on the swell of her belly where their child kicked vigorously. "Perhaps you should stay in town with Alice for the last few weeks. Be closer to help when the time comes." Katherine shook her head firmly. "This baby will be born at home, Zach. Our home." "But if something goes wrong?" She placed her fingers against his lips. "Dr. Price has already agreed to stay in town for the month of November. Emmett will ride for him at the first sign. And Alice has assisted at 3 births already." Zach sighed, knowing her mind was made up. "At least promise you'll stop trying to do everything yourself. Your only job now is to rest and grow our child." She smiled indulgently. "I promise to be sensible. But I won't sit idle while there's still work to be done." November arrived with unexpected mildness, as if nature itself was conspiring to ease Zach's worries about weather complicating the birth. Katherine moved more slowly now but remained determined to manage their household until the very end. On the evening of November 18th, as Zach returned from town with supplies, he found the lantern already lit on the fence post earlier than usual. Something about this deviation from routine sent him galloping the last quarter mile to the cabin. He found Katherine standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the other cradling her belly. "It's time," she said simply. Zach had never moved so quickly in his life. He helped Katherine to their bed, made her comfortable with pillows and blankets, then raced to saddle his fastest horse. He paused only to press a kiss to her forehead, before riding like the devil himself was on his heels toward town. He returned within the hour with both Dr. Price and Alice, the latter having insisted on coming despite her husband's concerns about her riding at such speed. They found Katherine breathing steadily through contractions that were coming closer together. "You've done this before," Dr. Price observed, washing his hands in the basin Zach had prepared. "I've helped with calving," Zach admitted. "Not quite the same, I expect." The doctor's eyes crinkled with understanding. "Just keep her calm and follow my instructions. Alice and I will handle the rest." What followed was the longest night of Zach's life. Katherine labored with quiet determination, squeezing his hand through contractions, resting against him in between. He wiped her brow, offered water, and whispered encouragement as the hours passed. Dawn was just breaking when Katherine's final push brought their daughter into the world, her indignant cry filling the cabin with the most beautiful sound Zach had ever heard. "A girl," Dr. Price announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant. "A perfect little girl." He placed the tiny bundle in Katherine's arms. Zach stared in awe at the red-faced, dark-haired miracle they had created together. Katherine looked up at him, exhausted but radiant. "Emma," she said softly. "Emma Rose Jenkins." Zach's vision blurred with tears as he gently touched his daughter's cheek. "Emma," he agreed, "after my mother." Katherine nodded. "I thought you'd approve." Later, after Katherine and Emma were cleaned up and resting, after Dr. Price had departed with assurances that both mother and child were doing excellently, after Alice had prepared food and tidied the house, Zach stepped outside into the bright November morning. The lantern still burned on the fence post, though its light was pale in the daylight. He walked to it, this beacon that had guided him home for so long, and carefully extinguished the flame. Not because it was no longer needed, he suspected they would continue their tradition for years to come, but because today, a new light had entered their lives. When he returned to the bedroom, Katherine was nursing Emma, her face soft with wonder and love. "I put out the lantern," he told her, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. She looked up with understanding in her eyes. "We've come home at last, haven't we?" "We have," he agreed, gathering his family close. "All of us." 5 years later, Zachariah Jenkins rode back to his ranch after a long day of driving cattle to summer pasture. The setting sun painted the sky in magnificent oranges and pinks, but darkness would fall before he reached home. As his property came into view, he saw what he expected to see: a lantern, glowing steadily on the fence post. But there was more. 2 smaller figures stood beside the fence, waving excitedly as he approached. Emma, now 5, jumped up and down in her eagerness, while 3-year-old Thomas tried to imitate his sister's enthusiasm. Behind them, Katherine stood in the warm light spilling from the cabin's open door, their youngest 6-month-old Sarah cradled in her arms. As Zach dismounted, Emma and Thomas raced to him, their voices tumbling over each other as they recounted the day's adventures. He scooped them both up, one in each arm, and carried them toward the house toward Katherine, who watched him with the same loving eyes that had guided him home through so many nights. "Welcome home," she said when he reached her. rising on tiptoes to kiss him despite the squirming children in his arms. "The best part of every day," he replied, following her inside to the warmth and light of their home. Later, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing he'd built years earlier, watching stars appear in the vast Wyoming sky. Catherine's head rested against his shoulder, her hand clasped in his. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. "A dangerous pastime," he teased, earning a gentle poke in the ribs. "I've been thinking about that first lantern I left for you," she continued. "How nervous I was, how unsure if you'd even notice it or know it was from me." "I noticed," he assured her, "though I admit I was puzzled at first." She smiled at the memory. "I just wanted to do something kind for the quiet rancher who'd helped me without being asked. I never imagined where that simple gesture would lead." Zach lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "To 3 beautiful children and the happiest life a man could ask for." "Are you happy, Zach? Truly?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said with complete honesty. "You lit a path through my darkness, Katherine, not just with lanterns, but with your heart." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods along the creek. Eventually, they rose together and went inside, closing the door on the darkness outside. But on the fence post, the lantern continued to burn, a small, steady flame against the vast night, a symbol of the light they had found in each other, and would keep burning all the days of their lives.